Vancouver is a city in Clark County, Washington, on the north bank of the Columbia River. It is known for its scenic views. Vancouver is sometimes referred to as the Hollywood of the North because most neighborhoods there see very little violent crime. While most people agree that Vancouver is a safe place to live, there are still some dangers there. This brings us back to a terrible incident that happened in 1974. Born in Eugene, Oregon, sometime in 1956, Martha Murray Morrison grew up with her sister, Reba. Despite their mother's deafness, the two girls got along well, and Martha devoted many hours to learning sign language. This allowed her to help her mother during the majority of her childhood. While residing in Lane County, Oregon, Martha was placed in foster care for a period of time. She went to Corvallis Farm School in Corvallis and Roosevelt High School in Portland. Martha had a past of drug abuse, drug use, and running away from the Corvallis Farm School, as well as her foster and biological family's residence. By 1974, Martha was a pretty 17-year-old with long brown hair and hazel eyes. She went to Arizona to take part in a job program there, where she met a boy who was also a student. The two moved to Portland together. In middle of 1974, the boy was thought to be Martha's boyfriend and worked as a welder at the shipyards. While they did not argue frequently, on September 1, 1974, Martha stormed out of their apartment with a suitcase after giving up on him following an argument. Tragically, this was the last time Martha's boyfriend saw her alive. Martha never came back home. The following month, there were reports of a foul smell coming from Dole Valley, a heavily forested area of Vancouver in eastern Clark County. On October 12, 1974, a search party was formed to investigate the issue, and while in the valley, they found the remains of two women arranged side by side. The bodies had just been left on the ground, and wildlife had taken its course on them, making it difficult to determine the cause of death. Nevertheless, the authorities were called to the scene. Still, the police believed that the two women had been murdered and they had sufficient proof to declare the case a homicide. Following her husband's August 4th report of her missing on that same year, dental records quickly revealed the identity of the first body to be 18-year-old Carol Platt Valenzuela. When Carol failed to arrive home that evening, as planned after being last seen hitchhiking in Vancouver, Washington, on August 2, 1974, her husband became concerned. Over the course of the following few days, he searched for Carol but was unable to locate her, so he reported her missing to the police. After learning of the discovery and being questioned further, Carol's husband was freed on October 25, 1974, following his successful completion of a polygraph test. Carol had left behind twins who were only 10 months old when she vanished. All inquiries yielded no results regarding the identity of the second body. Still, the age of this unnamed woman was initially estimated to be in the range of 20 to 25. An anthropologist from the University of Washington was tasked with examining the remains. It was difficult to determine the precise time or cause of death due to animal activity and natural decomposition, but examination revealed that the victims had been dead for at least 2 weeks before their bodies were found, though it was possible that the women were not killed at the site where they were discovered in the months that followed the murder, and they might have been killed at different times. Sadly, the public failed to recognize the forensic facial reconstructions of the unidentified victim that were made from frontal and profile views and published in a newspaper. Detectives even disclosed physical attributes of the woman, mentioning her curly textured hair and poor dental hygiene. An extensive investigation was initiated to track down the murderer and identify the remains of the second woman discovered at the crime scene. However, the detectives' efforts proved fruitless as no clue or piece of evidence discovered at the scene could point a finger at the murderer. Although serial killers such as Ted Bundy and Randall Woodfield were identified as persons of interest in the murder cases of these two women, no concrete evidence was found to connect them to the incident. In the hopes that it would one day help solve the case, a DNA sample of each woman was collected and stored. The second woman's identity remained a mystery for several years despite the forensic department and law enforcement's best efforts. After many years with no fresh developments, the case grew hazy and was ultimately put on hold. Nikki Costa, an operations manager at the Clark County Medical Examiner Office, found in 2007 that the unidentified remains from the 1974 case had been mislabeled. The name Carol Platt Valenzuela, the girl whose body was discovered next to the unidentified woman, was written on some of the bone fragments belonging to the unidentified woman. Though it was thought to be a clerical error, they had to spend decades trying to identify the woman using false evidence, which cost them a great deal of effort. The case of Martha Morrison, who vanished from her Portland apartment on September 1, 1974, was taken up by Reba Morrison and her half-brother in 2010. Recalling that her family had submitted a missing persons report for Martha, Reba was disappointed upon revisiting the report. It turned out that no one had ever reported Martha's disappearance to the authorities, and Reba found no evidence of a missing person report having been filed in 1974. The woman's remains, whose identity is still unknown, were sent to Bobby Cellmark Forensics in Lawton, Virginia in 2012, so that DNA could be examined. Eventually, a DNA profile was created and added to the DNA database. Following up with Reba in 2013, the detectives inquired about the possibility that the unidentified remains might belong to Martha Morrison, Reba's sister who had gone missing. After the successful collection of DNA samples from Reba and her half-brother, the researchers optimistically forwarded the samples to the University of North Texas in an effort to gather additional data. Subsequently, a genetic profile was created by comparing the samples obtained from Reba and her half-brother with potential matches. Some similarities were found when the samples and the unidentified remains were compared, but a definitive match could not yet been made. Eventually, Martha and the victim who was not identified were added to the National Missing and Unidentified Person Database, which is dedicated to finding missing persons and identifying human remains. In order to conduct a more precise DNA analysis, the Clark County medical examiners needed DNA samples from additional members of Reba's family. As a result, they requested a sample of Martha's mother's DNA and conducted tests on it. The results again demonstrated consistency in the DNA but were inconclusive regarding the identity of the woman. Following earlier ineffective testing, forensic investigators desired to test one more family member, Martha's father. However, since he had already passed away, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children promised to cover the cost of exhuming Martha's father so that DNA could be recovered and compared to the unidentified remains. The final test result in 2015 verified that the remains belonged to Martha Morrison. Ever since, the Washington State Police have been examining evidence from cases involving suspected serial killers in an attempt to link them to the killings of Martha and Carol. While sifting through the evidence, the detectives discovered a woman's DNA sample that had been unidentified and discovered on the grip of an air pistol that belonged to a serial killer. When this DNA sample turned out to be an exact match to Martha Morrison's, the detectives hit the jackpot. In her testimony, a forensic scientist from the Washington State Patrol Lab in Vancouver stated that there was a 1 in 30 billion chance that the partial DNA profile she created from the weapon and Martha's remains matched Warren Leslie Forrest was identified as the serial killer whose gun contained Martha's DNA. Warren was already serving a life sentence in 2017 for the July 11, 1974 murder of Krista Blake, a 20-year-old who was last seen getting into his blue Ford Econoline cargo van close to downtown Vancouver. On October 2, 1974, Warren was taken into custody for the murder of Krista. This was only 10 days prior to the bodies of Martha and Carol being found in Dole Valley. In an effort to gather more information that would strengthen their case against Warren, investigators kept probing his past. Upon being finally questioned about this accusation, Warren refuted having killed Martha and Carol. Warren was charged with Martha Morrison's murder, though, after a forensic scientist from the Vancouver and Washington State Patrol Lab testified that the partial DNA profile she created from the weapon matched the partial DNA profile from Martha's remains. Prosecutors used this fresh evidence to file a new murder conviction against Warren in 2019, but he would still be serving a prison sentence for the previous killings. In January 2023, Warren's trial got underway and over 30 witnesses who had testified against him appeared. The family members of 16-year-old Jamie Grissom and 14-year-old Diane Gilchrist, as well as the other 6 girls and women who were allegedly killed by Warren, were among the people who attended the trial. In order to prove that Warren, who was now 74, had a pattern of kidnapping, abusing, and killing women in the early 1970s, the the prosecution called Norma Jean-Louis to the witness stand. In the year that Martha vanished, Norma Jean-Louis, another victim of Warren's, was only 15 years old when she managed to escape Warren's kidnapping and assault. After Warren had bound Norma to a tree and abandoned her for dead back in 1974, Norma was able to slither out to a road and seek assistance. When Warren was on trial in 2023, Norma gave testimony in court, saying that Warren had approached her as soon as she had left the Oregon Environmental Council after work to go to her next volunteer job. Warren approached her and inquired about her availability for a modeling job. Norma agreed to go with Warren and got into his blue van since he was very convincing. After that, he allegedly drove her to Portland's Washington Park, where he attacked her with a knife and attempted to choke her. According to Norma's testimony in court, Warren had led her out of the car with a noose around her neck, bound her in his trunk, shot her multiple times with an air pistol, which was used as evidence in Martha's case, strangled her until she passed out, covered her with logs and abandoned her for dead. Regarding the crimes he committed against Norma, Warren was never charged. Norma stated that her sole purpose was to provide answers to the families who were still in the dark about what had happened to their loved ones. Many of the parents of the young girls that Warren killed passed away without knowing what became of their daughters. Norma, the lone survivor of Warren's victims, claimed to have known what those girls' final moments would have been like, and that all she wanted was for Warren to face justice for the killings and provide some closure to the families of his victims. Warren's defense lawyer, C. Downs, stated that there was no proof of how or when Martha had passed away. He also brought up the fact that no one had ever kept track of the precise day she vanished. Keane clarified that all of the accusations made against Warren regarding Martha were purely conjectural and that Warren and Martha were total strangers. He went on to say that there were a number of distinctions between Warren's earlier assaults and Martha's case. The site where the remains of Warren's other victim Norma were discovered and where Martha's remains were discovered were not the same. The location of Martha's crime scene had nothing to do with the parks in Clarks County, where Warren had previously worked in one of its departments. Lauren Boyd, the Clark County prosecutor, stated during the closing arguments that Warren's plan to kill Martha was proven beyond a reasonable doubt by the DNA evidence and his history of kidnapping, abusing, and abandoning young women in rural Clark County in 1974. Lauren testified in court that Martha's blood was not accidentally on Warren's air pistol. She continued by saying that there was no other explanation because Warren's killing of Martha was the only way the blood could have ended there. A Southwest Washington jury on February 1, 2023 found suspected serial killer Warren Leslie Forrest guilty of first-degree murder in connection with Martha Morrison's cold case death. On February 17, 2023, he was rightfully sentenced to a further life term for the horrible act he had committed in 1974. The families of Warren's known victims breathed a sigh of relief, realizing that justice would have to suffice for the time being. They were relieved that the truth was at last publicized, and that Warren would bear the consequences, even though nothing could ever bring back the loved ones Warren had stolen from them. Moving forward with their lives and cherishing the memories of the ones they lost would be their next steps at this point. Michael Morrison, Martha's half-brother, stated that more investigation was necessary for Warren's other possible victims. For him, the issue went beyond his sister's murder to include the years of suffering that all the families had to endure. At least 5 other homicide cases still have Warren as the main suspect, and the investigators will not stop until they have conclusively connected him to the crimes he committed. On December 1993, a homeowner in Choctaw County, Oklahoma, discovered human remains in her backyard, so she called 911. Deputies with the Choctaw County Sheriff's Office responded to the home. They contacted Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation and requested assistance in the investigation. An autopsy performed by doctors in the Oklahoma Chief Medical Examiner's office determined that the remains belonged to a male baby. It was also determined that the baby had been born alive. The medical examiner ruled that the baby boy's throat had been slashed. Investigators conducted numerous interviews after the discovery of the baby's body, but the case went cold. Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation agents obtained and stored DNA evidence from the scene for possible future use. In 2020, law enforcement took another look at the case, trying to finally identify the boy. They submitted the DNA evidence they had collected to Parabon Nanolabs. As many of you will know by now, Parabon specializes in providing phenotyping services to law enforcement agencies. The results from Parabon Nanolabs came back in April of 2021. After reviewing the results, the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation team began pursuing new leads. That led them to 53-year-old Mouney and Michelle Allen. On Wednesday, June 15, 2022, an Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation agent met with Allen at the Durant Police Department in Oklahoma. During the interview, Allen agreed to submit samples of her DNA to be tested to determine if she was the biological mother of the baby doe. Shortly after providing the DNA sample, Allen admitted that she was in fact the biological mother. During a follow-up interview a few days later, Allen confessed to cutting the baby's throat shortly after his birth. At the time, Allen worked at a daycare center. According to investigators, she said that she did not tell anyone about her pregnancy or delivery. She also told no one what she did to the baby. Allen was booked into the Choctaw County Detention Center and is being held without bond. It has not been made public yet why she did what she did or who the father is. Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation Director Ricky Adams said in a statement, "The synergy between our agents and criminalists to solve cold cases, especially those with an unidentified victim, is to be applauded. Identifying the use of genetic genealogy as a tool and the work of Parabon and our internal genealogy specialist provided significant leads in this disturbing case. Baby doe can now be properly laid to rest, and Allen will be held accountable." 22-year-old Rashid Young lived in Pottstown, Pennsylvania in 2019. Pottstown is about 40 miles northwest of Philadelphia. He shared the home he lived in with his boyfriend, Keishan Sheffield. Keishan was 17 years old at the time. Rashid vanished on August 19, 2019. Shortly thereafter, his family and friends received text messages from his phone cutting ties with him. Just over a month later, unidentified and decomposing remains belonging to a male were discovered by landscaper at the Aubrey Arboretum in the Philadelphia neighborhood of Germantown. At the time, a post-mortem examination was unable to identify the victim. Keishan reported Rashid missing in December 2019, 2 months after he had been last seen. The link between the body found and Rashid's disappearance was unfortunately not made initially. For more than 2 years, the body remained unidentified. Montgomery County investigators recently increased their efforts in finding Rashid. His family also hired a private investigator to look into his disappearance. The investigation found through the use of a confidential informant, cell phone records, and other investigative means that Rashid had been dating Keishan for 2 years by the time he disappeared. Investigators had not known about Keishan before this. Investigators then went to interview Keishan Sheffield. He just told them he was no longer in contact with Rashid after a fight they had. Investigators believed he wasn't telling them everything he knew, so they continued investigating. A witness finally came forward saying that he helped Sheffield dig a hole at the Aubrey Arboretum for Rashid's body. Investigators had to make sure there's truth to his story. They were able to confirm that the unknown man who was buried in the Arboretum was in fact Rashid. Now they had to see if Sheffield really was responsible. They found that Sheffield made numerous withdrawals from Rashid's $2 million trust fund. He was also driving Rashid's car. Investigators also found that the messages to Rashid's family and friends cutting ties actually came from Sheffield. Even more damning, investigators discovered that Sheffield flooded Rashid's house to get rid of possible evidence. On June 1, 2022, Keishan Sheffield was arrested at his home in Philadelphia in connection to the case. Sheffield is in custody at the Montgomery County Detention Facility. He's being held without bail. Investigators gave a summary of what took place in their press conference. According to them, Sheffield fatally stabbed Rashid at his home on August 19, 2019. He then later intentionally flooded the home to destroy evidence. Sheffield stuffed Rashid's remains into a recycling container. He transported the container to his mother's house. Sheffield then contacted the witness and the two of them buried Rashid at the Arboretum. He then accessed Rashid's social media accounts to give the appearance that Rashid was still alive from August to December of 2019. Investigators have not released a motive, but described the crime as domestic violence related. Sheffield has been charged with taking Rashid's life, theft by unlawful taking, receiving stolen property, possessing an instrument of crime, and access device fraud. Atlanta, the state capital and most popular city in Georgia, will be our destination for this case study. Here, on July 2, 2020, Jermaine Ranmine Carter, also fondly called Baby Ocean, was born into the loving arms of Zakiya Morris and Jermaine Carter Sr. being a very happy baby. He was known to bring his family endless happiness with his contagious smile. Unfortunately, his promising life was taken from him before it had a chance to fully begin. When Baby Ocean was 6 months old on February 2, 2021, he was taken to Easter Seals Center Sylvan, a daycare center in southwest Atlanta. It was discovered that the child was not responding after a few hours. An ambulance quickly arrived after a 911 call was placed. The child was taken to the hospital immediately, but sadly he did not survive. Natural causes were initially assumed to be the cause of Baby Ocean's death. But in 2023, almost 2 years after the terrible event, Zakiya, the mother of the child, called the police. The precise nature of this conversation is still unknown, but it sparked a fresh look into Baby Ocean's death circumstances. Following the tragic incident involving Baby Ocean, law enforcement officials contacted the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning in an attempt to identify the staff members who were present. After this investigation, 2 people who were in the facility when the child died were found. Stephanie Thompson was the name of one of the women. Important information regarding what happened on that fateful day started to come to light as the investigation progressed. Stephanie revealed in the interview that on the day in question, Baby Ocean had fallen asleep in her arms. She then took great care to place the baby on a bobby pillow, making sure he was facing up, and she went on to work on her laptop. The other employee was not in the room where Baby Ocean was sleeping at that particular moment. 2 other kids in Stephanie's care woke up from naps while she was still working, so she took care of them. When Baby Ocean was last checked on by Stephanie, he was still asleep. But soon, when left alone, the 6-month-old started to make noises. The child lifted his arm and Stephanie thought he was just adjusting his posture. Stephanie went back to check on Baby Ocean after finishing her tasks with the other kids, and she was horrified to see that he had stopped breathing. Immediately after, a 911 call was made and CPR was started in an attempt to save the baby's life, but sadly, it was unsuccessful. Following Stephanie's interview, officials thoroughly examined the training materials, and they discovered something significant. It was discovered that boppy pillows were not listed as acceptable safety materials for use when a baby was sleeping. It was evident from the official records that all infants were to be put into a crib or car seat for naps. Lena Barber, the daycare director where Baby Ocean died, made it clear that boppy pillows were only for kids who were awake. The U.S. Consumer Safety Commission released disturbing information about the inherent risks of boppy pillows, especially with regard to suffocation hazards. Remarkably, the federal department records specific boppy pillows 7 months after Baby Ocean's untimely death. The tragic deaths of 10 babies across the country served as the impetus for this recall. If infants were able to move, the CPSC made it clear that they ran the risk of suffocating or getting into positions that inhibited their breathing. The possibility of babies rolling off the pillow surface adds even more serious safety concerns. Essentially, it was determined that Stephanie and the daycare center had violated state laws by failing to provide sufficient supervision and by putting a child in a dangerous sleeping environment. Following these discoveries, Stephanie was taken into custody and accused of second-degree murder and second-degree child abuse. Stephanie was not granted bond during her first court appearance on June 13, 2023. Stephanie's future is currently uncertain due to the uncertain final result of her legal proceedings. Donald Oakey and Vicki Felton were both members of the United States Army. The couple met while serving in California in 1977. On August 21, 1979, Vicki gave birth to their first daughter, Lee Marine Oakey. on a military base in Honolulu, Hawaii. Just 2 years later, Vicky and Donald got divorced. Donald relocated to Germany, but remained in contact with Lee, who sometimes visited him in Germany. Vicky settled in Tupelo, Mississippi with Lee and a new man, Julian Barney Yarbrough Jr. Vicky and Julian got married too, but separated in early 1992. On the morning of August 27, 1992, Lee, then age 13, was left at her home at 105 Honey Locust Drive when Vicky departed for her job at approximately 8 a.m. This was the very first time Lee was left at home by herself. Lee was going to be picked up later in the day by her grandmother and go to a school open house and then to Taco Bell for dinner. Shortly after arriving in her office, Vicky was notified that a storm related to Hurricane Andrew was headed for their town. She had retrieved a radio out of her boss's office so she could listen to the news for the weather. She called the house to let Lee know about the storm. Vicky knew that Lee was very afraid of thunderstorms. Lee failed to answer the phone, so Vicky became worried and went back home. According to Vicky, when she returned home, she found the garage door open and the light on. Entering the house, she noticed blood smeared on the side of the wall. When she went through all of the rooms and could not find any sign of Lee, she called 911. Law enforcement found additional pools of blood in Lee's upstairs bedroom, as well as significant portions smeared in the hallway, bathroom, and on her bedroom door. From the evidence found, it appeared to investigators that the perpetrator attempted to clean the scene. The only items missing from the house were Lee's shoes, reading glasses, some of her underclothes, and a sleeping bag. Investigators launched organized searches, mainly through the wooded areas surrounding the house. Donald went to Tupelo to start searching for his daughter as well. He was quoted as saying, "It felt like someone punched me in the stomach. Initially, I thought that she may have run away, so I did not go to Mississippi right away." Donald was told by several locals that they believed Vicky was responsible. There was also rumors going around that Lee's stepfather Barney Yarbrough was abusive towards Lee. Yarbrough was however ruled out by law enforcement after providing a substantiated alibi and passing a polygraph examination. 8 days after Lee went missing on September 4, 1992, a worker at McDonald's in Boonville, Mississippi told law enforcement that they had seen a girl resembling Lee in a car in the restaurant drive-thru. Boonville is a little over 30 miles from Tupelo, where Lee is from. Investigators followed up on the lead but determined that the little girl the worker saw was not Lee. Then, 5 days after that, on September 9th, a package containing Lee's glasses was mailed to their residence. It was addressed to Barney Yarbrough. The package was postmarked from Boonville, Mississippi. The FBI then became involved after the latest development. They performed DNA testing on the stamps that were adhered to the envelope in which the glasses were mailed. The FBI determined that the person who sent the glasses used water and not saliva on the stamp. Investigators felt that the glasses were mailed as a distraction. Tupelo Police Chief Bartigary said, "There was no ransom letter or anything like that came with those glasses. It was just those glasses. You would think if it was an actual kidnapping, you would have expected a little more to come along with that." On November 9th, 1993, it was reported in the media that a Monroe County coroner had positively confirmed that a human skull found in a soybean field was that of Lee. Several days later, this statement was retracted, however. It was then stated that the medical examiner would perform further forensic testing on the skull that was found. It was subsequently determined that the skull belonged to 27-year-old Pollyanna Sue Keith. Pollyanna went missing in March of 1993. Investigators were running out of leads as they couldn't find Lee. They decided that Lee's mother, Vicky, should take a polygraph test. She was administered 3 separate examinations, 1 with the local law enforcement and 2 with the FBI. It was determined that Vicky showed deception on all of them. Vicky disputes that she had any involvement in her daughter's disappearance. Responding to 3 failed polygraph tests, she said, "I couldn't tell you why. They measure changes in your body, and when your daughter has gone missing and they strap you up to those things, I can't imagine anyone's body not reacting." She has openly stated that she believes a man named Oscar McKinley Kearns was responsible for Lee disappearing. 9 months after Lee disappeared, Kearns kidnapped a 15-year-old girl he had met through a Tupelo church. For this crime, he was sentenced to over 8 years of incarceration, but served only half of this sentence for some dumb reason. After being released, Kearns then kidnapped a couple and assaulted the woman. He was convicted for this crime in 1999. Investigators have found no concrete evidence linking Kearns to the disappearance of Lee. Lee's disappearance has been covered by Nance Grace and was also featured on The Geraldo Rivera Show. In 2017, the disappearance was the subject of a 6-episode podcast called The Search for Lee Oki. The case was also featured on an episode of true crimes podcast Crime Junkie, and The Trail Went Cold. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children created an image showing what Lee might look like if she was still alive today. If you have any information concerning this case, please contact the Tupelo Police Department at 662-841-6491. 17-year-old Gladys Arellano lived in Boyle Heights, Los Angeles in 1996. She was beautiful, intelligent, and had big dreams for her life. Gladys was last seen on January 28, 1996, leaving her home. When she failed to return home later in the day, she was reported missing by her family. 2 days later, her body was found off a main road in a ravine in Topanga Canyon. She had been assaulted and strangled. Serology evidence was collected from her body, and a DNA profile of the unknown offender was uploaded to the state and federal DNA databases, but a match could not be found. An extensive investigation was completed by the investigators at the time, but it led nowhere and the case went cold until 2019, when Los Angeles police arrested a man by the name of Jose Luis Garcia. Domestic assault. During the booking process, DNA swabs were taken from Garcia and processed. Investigators then realized that his DNA matched the DNA that was taken from Gladys Arellano's body. Detectives visited Garcia and questioned him about Gladys. The crime took place when he was just 19 years old. They obtained a second DNA swab from him. The Los Angeles Crime Lab was then able to confirm that Garcia's genetic profile matched the unidentified sample taken from Gladys's body in 1996. 43-year-old Jose Luis Garcia was arrested by U.S. Marshals on September 29, 2019 in Dallas, Texas. He was extradited on October 14 to Los Angeles County, where he was held on a $1 million bail. Detective Hugo Rienarga said this case is typical of the type of unsolved cases that the detectives are faced with on a daily basis. We are gratified that we are successful in bringing this tragic case to a close. Rienarga confirmed that investigators were looking into the possibility that Garcia was involved in other crimes as well. Gladys Arellano's niece and goddaughter, Samantha Moreno, spoke movingly of the need to remember her godmother as well as all other women who were victims of violence. Recognizing her life is important. Beautiful Latina souls from Boyle Heights should never be forgotten. Moreno said acts of violence against women should never be forgotten. Samantha Moreno thanked the detectives who never lost sight of finding justice. Gladys Arellano's case was worked on by retired detectives Joe Purcell and Sean McCarthy, who both work part-time on the Sheriff's Department's Unsolved Case Unit. Thank you for not giving up on our Gladys, who was a loving daughter, sister, aunt, and godmother. Gladys was only 17 when her life was taken. She had a beautiful soul. She was beautiful, intelligent, gorgeous, and she had a radiant smile. She had such big dreams for her life. My grandparents would have been so proud of her, Samantha Moreno said. She was grateful Garcia was off the streets after nearly a quarter century. We want nothing more than for him to pay for his brutal crime, she said. We recognize that this will not bring Gladys back, but we are relieved to know that there will be justice for Gladys. This is a victory that we acknowledge in her honor, and we look forward to more victories. Jose Luis Garcia was found guilty of all the charges against him on July 18, 2023. It was a day the loved ones of Gladys Arellano had been waiting decades for. It is never enough for having taken the life of such a beautiful soul, said Elizabeth Arellano, Gladys Arellano's sister and best friend. She told the court what Garcia did nearly destroyed them as they wondered for more than 25 years what happened to her. It was tough, but it felt really good to finally get it off your chest and actually like seeing him and, releasing it and having some kind of comfort, said Vanessa Orellano, Gladys Arellano's younger sister. Janet Ramirez, Gladys' close friend, said the plea deal gives her some comfort. But it is not enough. 19 years is never enough, but I have comfort knowing now she can rest, that the perpetrator is going to be behind bars because for 25 years, I've lived with the guilt of not knowing what I could have done different, Ramirez said. Jose Luis Garcia was sentenced on August 15, 2023 to 18 years and 8 months in prison for taking Gladys Serrano's life. Garcia pleaded no contest to voluntary manslaughter, kidnapping, and domestic assault. According to the district attorney's office, he waived his credit for the just over 1,000 he has spent in jail since his 2020 arrest. Retired Sheriff's Detective Joe Purcell, who handled the cold case investigation, said, "The fact is that we can give justice to people and to society. It is really important not to let these cases go unresolved. We need to have people pay the debt they owe to society." Catherine Scott Eggleston was born in Redmond, Oregon on May 4, 1971. She went by the nickname Katie. She graduated from Oregon State University in the spring of 1993. Katie earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in English. After graduating from college, Katie went to live with her older sister Janet in Gresham, Oregon. Gresham is a suburb of Portland. Katie took a job as a salesperson for AllNet Communication Services. They were based in Lake Oswego. On the morning of August 2, 1993, departed from her office to attend a business meeting in Portland. It was her first day of making sales visits alone. She went to the Port of Portland building located at 700 Multnomah Street. Katie was seen making phone calls in the building lobby, and 5 individual witnesses who saw her there said that she appeared preoccupied and worried. At approximately 2:15 p.m., the client with whom Katie had an appointment witnessed her exiting an elevator in the lobby with a man wearing a blue blazer. The client described the unknown man as having dark hair and a dark complexion. This would be the last confirmed sighting of Katie Eggleston. Her absence was first noted when she failed to return to AllNet's Lake Oswego office, where she was supposed to meet an advisor at 5 p.m. When Katie failed to return home, her sister Janet notified their father, who traveled to the Portland area. In the early morning hours of August 3rd, the day after Katie was last seen, a security guard at an industrial complex located at Northeast 122nd Avenue and Airport Way discovered Katie's Volkswagen Golf parked in the lot. This location is about 9 miles from the Port of Portland building where Katie and her car was last seen. The doors of the car were unlocked and all the windows were rolled down, with the keys still in the ignition. Her purse and its contents were still in the car. The only thing missing was her passport. Katie's parents told investigators that Katie retrieved her passport from their home in Redmond while visiting 10 days prior. This made investigators believe that Katie might have disappeared on purpose. Her family disagreed. On August 6, 1993, fields located nearby were searched by volunteer searchers. There were a lot of theories going around at the time. Katie's parents suspected that her boyfriend was involved. Law enforcement cleared him after confirming he had been in Central Oregon at the time she disappeared. The second theory was that she simply ran away, possibly to avoid testifying a potential court case against her sister Janet for tax evasion. Janet and her husband Jeff were accused of failing to report around $190,000 in business income between 1986 and 1987. By October 1993, police had received hundreds of tips in the case, but none proved fruitful. When investigators again announced that they believe Katie ran away, her family decided to hire a retired Oregon State Police detective to further investigate the disappearance case. This produced several leads. One of the leads regarded a security guard who possessed keys to the Port of Portland building's parking garage. To further find leads, Katie's employer, AllNet, funded a tip hotline dedicated to tips in Katie's disappearance. Flyers were also distributed in Oregon and Washington area, hoping someone with useful information would come forward. One anonymous call placed to the tip hotline was by a man who claimed to have abducted Katie. He said that he took her life 2 weeks after her disappearance. The caller spoke with a southern dialect. He stated that she would never be found because she's not alive anymore. On May 4, 2001, it was Katie's 30th birthday. Her family set up another hotline seeking additional tips. One man who called was a former attendant at a gasoline station located at 122nd Avenue and Stark Street. He claimed to have seen Katie near the time she disappeared. This gas station is located about 4 miles from where her car would be found. The man claimed to have given Katie directions to the airport. He said that she departed in a vehicle whose make and model he could not recall. According to him, Katie returned to the gas station a short while later in a different car, a blue-green Honda hatchback. She was accompanied by 2 black men. According to the attendant, Katie appeared disheveled, partially undressed and crying. Lastly, the man also noted that when Katie first arrived alone, he noticed a thick, black book on the passenger seat of her car. This resembled the sales binder she had with her that day. Law enforcement's belief that Katie ran away changed in 2004. A man by the name of Joel Courtney became a suspect in her disappearance. He was responsible for taking the life of Brooke Wilberger. He lived in the Portland area at the time Katie was last seen. Katie's parents passed away in 2011 and 2017 respectively, without ever learning what happened to their daughter. One fateful night on July 22, 1957, 2 young couples were in a parked car at a lover's lane on Van Ness Avenue in Hawthorne, near El Segundo, California. They were doing what was typical of teenagers. All of a sudden, their vigorous petting came to an end when they were accosted by a young man who was pointing a gun at them through the car's window. All the 4 teenagers in the car were compelled by their attacker to exit the car and form a lineup. The attacker was predicted to be in his early 20s, then ordered the terrified couples to remove their clothing after taking their money and jewelry. At that point, the teenagers could tell that the attacker was not a local by his accent, and it was clear he had been drinking. The gunman obviously wanted the teenagers' 1949 Ford sedan. Sadly, that wasn't the only thing the 20-something drifter was after. He also sexually attacked one of the girls after tying the hands of 3 of the victims behind their backs. All 4 victims anticipated being shot because they could all clearly see their assailant's face. Fortunately, the attacker just sped off in their vehicle. The teenagers were alive, but visibly scared to death. Shortly before 1:30 a.m., the stolen vehicle sped through a red light directly in front of 2 on-duty police officers, Rosecrans Avenue and Sepulveda Boulevard. The officers, Richard Phillips and his partner Milton Curtis, immediately overtook the sped-up car and forced the driver to come to a stop. The police were not informed of the crimes that the driver had committed since the car had not yet been reported stolen. Officer Richard Phillips prepared to give him a ticket. The perpetrator ought to have simply accepted the summons and left. Instead, when Officer Phillips turned his back, the driver fired 3 shots at him with the same gun he had used to rob the teenagers. Before Officer Curtis could bring out his firearm, the perpetrator fired another rounds of 3 shots through the window of the patrol car where he sat, striking him. The criminal then left the area, but not before Officer Phillips was able to shoot the fleeing car 3 times with his own gun. 28-year-old Officer Richard Phillips and his 25-year-old partner, Officer Milton Curtis, both passed away before the ambulance Officer Phillips had called for could arrive. Officer Richard Phillips had served with the El Segundo Police Department for 2 years. He was survived by his wife and 3 children, while Officer Curtis Milton had only served with the El Segundo Police Department for 2 months. He was survived by his wife's son and daughter. Both victims' family was inconsolable. Jane, Officer Curtis' wife, could not stop professing how much she loved him. According to her, they had a misunderstanding before he left for his work shift. Till today, she regrets not having sorting out their issues and saying goodbye properly. Numerous police officers from across the county turned out to try to find the offender, but it yielded nothing. There was not much evidence at the crime scene. The incidents led to the biggest manhunt in California's history as the culprit appeared to have vanished into thin air. Later, the stolen car was discovered nearby, abandoned. In the car, the police only discovered 2 bullets from Officer Phillips' gun, making the police believe that the 3rd bullet likely struck the attacker. A single thumbprint was collected from the steering wheel. This print failed to reveal a culprit for many years. 3 years after the murder, in 1960, Doe Tooley, the owner of Manhattan Beach, a residence close to the crime scene, went to the police station to submit 2 watches and a .22 caliber revolver he discovered while cleaning his property. It was discovered that the watches belonged to the teenagers who were robbed in 1957, and the revolver was the murder weapon. That night in 1957, the attacker is believed to have dropped those things while leaving the stolen car behind. These pieces of evidence discovered provided a vital lead. The serial number of the revolver led police to a Sears in Shreveport, Louisiana, where G.D. Wilson was documented as the buyer's name. The gun, which was the cheapest one the shop sold, cost $29.95. Investigators found that George D. Wilson had rented a room at AYMCA close to the Sears store, but had provided a false Florida address. Police investigated every George D. Wilson they could find for years, but nothing came up. Many years later, in 2002, a certain woman reported to the El Segundo police that her dead uncle had once boasted of killing 2 police officers. Although the claim was a dead end, it reignited interest in the police officer's cold case. The fingerprint from the teenager's car in 1957 was examined by investigators using the recently released automated fingerprint identification system. Surprisingly, there was a match to a man named Gerald Fighton Mason, who was found guilty of burglary in Colombia in 1956. Due to that incident, he had to serve a 1-year term in prison. In addition to matching fingerprints, the evidence also included identical handwriting, which connected him to the murder weapon he used to kill the police officers in 1957. Handwriting analyst Paul Edholm determined that the signatures he had on the IMCA receipt and Sears documents in 1957 were identical to the handwriting on his 1999 South Carolina driver's license application and on a bill of sale for a car. It hadn't changed at all. This was another glaring evidence for the investigators to get to the root of the matter. After the murders, Gerald Mason was a law-abiding citizen for 45 years, never receiving even a parking ticket. He was a wealthy retiree. He was married, had 2 daughters and 6 grandchildren. He lived quietly in a suburban area with his family. He owned 2 gas stations. Friends and neighbors regarded him as being amiable and helpful. Without even the slightest regret for the officer's family, who had lost their loved one so long ago, Gerald Mason was able to enjoy a long and successful life. In the long run, friends and relatives were horrified to learn that he had committed such a heinous murder. On January 26, 2003, the police who had been watching Gerald Mason for weeks and had seen him playing golf with friends and engaging in other benign pastimes eventually knocked on his door. Gerald Mason was said to have been shocked and asked them where they were from. The police officers introduced themselves and told him that they were there because of the murders of 2 police officers in 1957. A horrified Gerald Mason responded with, "My God, you're here for that. That happened so long ago. I can't believe you're here bothering me with that." Gerald Mason's scar from a bullet graze wound caused by a gunshot fired by Officer Phillips in 1957 was used to further identify him as the culprit after his arrest. Following Mason's arrest that January, officers executed a search warrant at his Columbia house and discovered another unique 9-shot .22 revolver similar to the murder weapon. Investigators also discovered 3 witnesses who recognized Gerald Mason as the man they had seen the night of the murders based on a photograph taken in 1956. Due to the overwhelming amount of evidence, Gerald Mason confessed to the cops that he had been drinking when he came upon the teenagers. Then, in an effort to hide the rape, robbery, and car theft, he shot both police officers. "I really don't have an explanation for why this happened. I wish I did," Gerald Mason said. When asked about the teenager he had raped, Gerald Mason said he no longer remembered the reason why he had raped the 15-year-old girl. Following his arrest, Jerry Mason Whitaker, Gerald Mason's daughter, said in an interview, "There really aren't words to describe the range of emotions we've gone through. I could not have had a better father." Gerald Mason professed his regrets to the families of Officers Phillips and Curtis during his sentence hearing. "It's impossible to express to so many people how sorry I am. I do not understand why I did this. It does not fit in my life. It is not the person I know. I detest these crimes," he said. The surviving families of the victims did not feel any iota of sympathy for Gerald Mason as they pour out their pains in court. "Your cowardly act shattered our lives forever. "You caused our mother to become a widow with 3 babies to raise alone," said Carolyn Phillips, Officer Richard Phillips' daughter. The other slain officer's son, Keith Curtis, claimed outside of court that Gerald Mason's in-court apology had not touched him. "Mr. Mason is sorry now, and we heard his apology speech. He wasn't sorry for 45 years. And the only reason we're hearing that apology now is because he got caught," Keith Curtis said. Gerald Mason was given 2 consecutive life sentences with a minimum of 7 years after entering a guilty plea. As part of the agreement, the rape, robbery, and grand theft charges were dropped, sparing Mason's family from hearing about how he had raped a teenage girl, as well as the living victims from having to testify. Gerald Mason's application for parole was denied in 2009. He won't have to appear in front of the panel again for a maximum of 15 years until March 2024, when he will be 90 years old. Prosecutors in California were adamant that he would never be freed. His plea agreement allowed him to serve his prison term close to his family. Thus, he was detained in South Carolina. However, on January 22, 2017, 9 days before his 83rd birthday, Mason passed away in prison. He had served 14 years behind bars. His next parole hearing was 7 years away. Melissa Rekuba lived in Lackawanna County, Pennsylvania in 2013 with her husband Bruno Rekuba. On August 6, 2013, Bruno called 911. He told the operator he shot Melissa in the head inside their home but claimed it was an accident. Melissa was taken to the hospital but sadly succumbed to her injuries 4 days later. At first Bruno was saying that they were fighting but it was simply an accident. Then later he said he was playing with the gun and it went off. According to the police, Bruno changed his story 7 times in just the first 24 hours. Investigators looked at surveillance footage depicting a heated argument between Bruno and Melissa. Authorities also learned about a family inheritance Melissa's mother won at a casino in the Atlantic City for $1.5 million. This was seen as a potential motive. Despite investigators believing Bruno meant to fatally shoot Melissa, they did not have enough evidence to charge him. Pennsylvania State Police reinvestigated the case. Melissa's sister and daughters told the police that Bruno had pulled a gun on Melissa inside their home on previous occasions. Investigators also learned more about the $1.5 million family inheritance. The remaining payouts of those funds was supposed to be split between Bruno and his 2 daughters. Police learned that Bruno has been stealing over $100,000 of those funds from his daughters since 2013. Investigators also used new technology to prove that Bruno meant to shoot Melissa. They didn't elaborate as to what the new technology is. 56-year-old Bruno Rekuba was arrested on June 3, 2022. He was charged with taking the life of Melissa and theft. Trooper Robert Urban had this to say, "When it comes to investigations that are open, we always investigate them and try to uncover new leads." Well, in this case, we interviewed more people, we used different technology, different audio devices to make other interviews clearer. In the past, we've, through more investigatory leads, we've seen the stories have been changed and the counts of what Bruno said then we found to be, dishonest and prove him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. It's great when you can have closure with a case like this. You have a lot of family members and everything else will make sense about what deep down they may have thought would have happened. But they were never sure. Now we're actually able to investigate this the whole way and prove Mr. Rekuba as being guilty. And I think this adds closure to the family members and friends in the community. 30-year-old Sherry Herrera lived in Tulare, California in 1993. She was a mother of 4. Sherry was a prostitute and a known drug user. She was reported missing by her family members on March 25, 1993. 5 days later, on March 30th, Sherry's body was found on the Hayfield Road on-ramp to the I-10 in Desert Center. It is a rural area situated between Los Angeles and Phoenix. Sherry had been assaulted and strangled with a belt. There was also a bite mark on her body. Investigators collected all the DNA evidence they needed. The DNA samples were entered into the FBI's Combined DNA Index System in 2002. Then, in 2004, DNA from a different code case was also submitted into the Combined DNA Index System. The case is that of Shanda Denise Hayes. She is from Titus County, Texas. Her body was found in April of 1992. She was assaulted and strangled with a device made of wire and cord in a manner to control the victim. Her body was discovered near an I-30 rest area in Mount Pleasant, about 100 miles east from Dallas, Texas. Shinda is also a prostitute like Sherry. When DNA of her attacker was entered into the Codes in 2004, investigators realized that the same man was responsible for taking Shinda and Sherry's lives. Even though they could come to this conclusion, DNA technology was not advanced enough to identify the unknown man. They could only determine that he was African American and most likely lived in California or Texas. Recently, in September of 2020, Texas and California officials worked together and ultimately conducted genealogy research in the matching of DNA found at both crime scenes. In May of 2022, 67-year-old Douglas Thomas was identified as the person responsible for taking the life of Shinda Denise Hayes. He was arrested at his home in Waco. After his arrest, officials with the Riverside County Regional Code Case team traveled to Texas to question Thomas about Sherry's case. After DNA testing, it was confirmed that Douglas Thomas was indeed responsible for taking the life of Sherry Herrera as well. Thomas is currently in McClinton County Jail, where he is being held on a $2 million bond. He will first face prosecution in Texas, then he will be taken to California to face the charges against him there. Thomas was a truck driver for over 40 years. He traveled extensively around the U.S. and only recently retired. Investigators are definitely looking into the possibility that he is involved in other unsolved cold cases. Authorities in California are asking anyone with information about the case to contact Riverside County Regional Cold Case Homicide Team at 1-951-955-2777. Sherry's son Adrian, who was only 6 years old when his mother's life was taken, had this to say following the arrest. "I don't know if I really believed it because it's like, man, this has been so long. I remember coming home from school and my stepmom told us the news what had happened. Me and my sister were there. Obviously, we started bawling our eyes out." Armin and Lorraine Pelletier lived in Frenchville, Maine in 1985. It is a small town near the Canadian border. On December 7, 1985, Armin heard their Siberian husky named Paka pound on their door. He went to look and could not believe what he saw. At first, he thought it was a rag doll in the dog's mouth, but then realized it was a frozen little baby. The child was Caucasian, female, and still had her umbilical cord attached. Armin immediately called police. Detectives were able to track the dog's path to about 700 feet from their home, where the baby was born in a gravel pit. It was determined the baby passed away from the cold she was left in and not from being carried home by Paka. Investigators couldn't find any sign of the woman who delivered the baby, just blood and placental material. They collected DNA from the scene and stored it so they could use it later. No one in the town knew who the woman could be, so the case went cold. Detective Jay Pelletier was working at the Maine State Police Unsolved Homicide Unit and decided to take up the case. He was quoted as saying, "Having been from the area, I remember the media coverage initially. With the addition of DNA and genealogy information, we felt that this was a case that could be worked on at this time." Detectives worked alongside Identifiers International to identify 58-year-old Leanne Daigle as the mother of baby Jane Doe. Police say that Leanne was 21 years old when she went to the gravel pit in Fritchville, Maine to deliver the little baby girl. On June 13, 2022, Maine State Police traveled to Lowell, Massachusetts to arrest Leanne Daigle, formerly known as Leanne Jarrett. She is currently being held without bail at the Aroostook County Jail in Holton, Maine, and has pleaded not guilty. Police interviewed Leanne's ex-husband John Daigle. They asked him if she had been pregnant when they met in the summer of 1985. John was a 23-year-old college student, and the two met at July 4th celebration, 5 months before she gave birth. John was stunned when he learned about the baby, because he did not know she was pregnant back then. He said, "I fell to the floor. It shocked me that she had delivered a baby all by herself at -30-degree weather, drove herself home. I'm sure she bled." John was also told that the DNA showed that he was not the father of the baby. The man who was the father lives in an assisted living facility in Florida and cannot communicate anymore. John told police that Leanne is a survivor of childhood violence at the hands of her alcoholic father. He also said he now wonders if Leanne feared that he would end the relationship and leave without her for the new life they had begun planning in New Hampshire if he knew about the pregnancy. In an interview with the Press Herald, he also said that he would have wanted to raise the baby had he known about she was protecting the relationship I had with her because she thought I would have dumped her lickily split. Leanne told her daughter Kristen that she believes she may have been assaulted on the night of her 21st birthday, which was 9 months before she gave birth. She has no memory of the night at all. Leanne said that she was unaware that she was pregnant in 1985. Leanne told Kristen that she was driving home from work, felt a strong urge to urinate, and then gave birth to a baby she believed was not alive anymore, on the side of a road near a gravel pit. Kristen said, "My mom thought it was a stillborn. It didn't cry. It didn't move. To her, the baby was not alive. So to her, it was some freak miscarriage and something that she wanted to leave in the past. People have miscarriages all the time." Police are asking anyone with information they believe may be relevant to the investigation to call Maine State Police at 207-532-5400. When Etten Patz disappeared on his way to school, his family were unaware of what had happened to him until after school hours were over and he never returned home. The search for Etten Patz began and parents around New York became alarmed in such a way that they started changing the way many of them watched over their children. Now, almost 40 decades later, a man has been identified as the perpetrator. Ethan Khalil Patz was born on October 9, 1972 to Julian Stanley Patz in Manhattan, New York. He was the middle child. He had an elder sister and a younger brother. At the time of Etten's disappearance, he and his family lived in the Soho neighborhood of Lower Manhattan. Soho is an acronym for South of Houston Street, a name that was first used by renowned developer Chester Rapkin in 1962. Today, South of Houston Street is famous for its boutiques, art galleries, and loft living spaces. Famous celebrities like Dakota Fanning, Alicia Keys, Daniel Craig, John Legend, Justin Timberlake, and Samuel L. Jackson are known to reside or have resided there. The neighborhood might be safe for habitation now, but it wasn't always like that in the 1970s. It was much rougher. The overall appearance of New York City was substantially different back then than it is today. The city had been tainted by a financial crisis from which many believed it would never fully recover. There were high unemployment rates, a significant flight to the suburbs, and attacks on the subway. Times Square was known for its prostitutes and pimps, and Central Park was feared for robbery and rape. Abandoned buildings were occupied by drug dealers and the homeless. Tourists were not left out of attacks and robbery back then. The Council of Public Safety, decomposed of police, firefighters, and other unions, published a pamphlet titled "Welcome to Fear City" with a large skull on the cover. The pamphlet advised tourists not to go outside after 6 o'clock, not go out of Midtown. They must make a taxi call before leaving their hotels. They should never take a subway ride, and they should leave no belongings in the hotel safe at the time. When a visitor or tourist come to New York and see such pamphlet, they would undoubtedly turn around and leave. Consider what Etten Patz neighborhood may have looked like then. Boarded up buildings, shadowy alleys, no security cameras, and no cell phones. The morning of May 25, 1979, which appeared to have been a Friday, the final day of school before the Memorial Day holiday, was a chaotic one in the Patz household. Julie Patz, Etten's mother, who operated a daycare in their home, had her hands full that morning. She had 2 two-year-olds to care for, her younger son and another kid who had spent the night. Also, Etten's older sister had resisted getting out of bed. Etten, on the other hand, woke up with a positive energy and was eager to start his day. According to Julie Patz, Etten had been attempting to be more independent, and in the midst of the chaos that morning, he saw an opportunity. He told his mom to allow him walk to school by himself. His mom recalled he pleaded, saying, "It's fine, Mom, I can do it." With some hesitation, Julie accepted. He then crammed his favorite toy cars into his tote bag, which was given to him by a friend's mother. Before leaving home, Eaton donned his favorite headgear, an Eastern Airlines cap, after which his mother led him outside. He reportedly left with a $1 note in hand because he intended to get a soda on the way to school. It was the last time Julie, his mother, saw him. When Etten didn't return home that afternoon, she called around and discovered he hadn't made it to his bus or school. Julie claimed that she was shocked when she learned that Etten was missing. The Patz family house had been transformed into a command post where the press, volunteers, and police investigators had gathered. Etten's photograph was extensively publicized, appearing on television newscasts and the front pages of the city's newspapers. The city was covered in missing posters that featured an image of his hair poking out from under a cap. He was reportedly the first missing kid to appear on a milk container. The way he vanished, the ensuing search, and the anxiety it caused engulfed Lower Manhattan. Residents recalled police officers going from door to door, showing his photos and questioning people about where he could possibly be. Etten's disappearance caused a huge stir even outside his neighborhood. President Ronald Reagan declared May 25th, the day of his disappearance, to be National Missing Children's Day, and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children was founded in 1984, in part as a result of his disappearance. His case received a lot of attention, but there were no solutions. Numerous theories were put up, and a number of suspects came to light, including Jose Ramos, a man who had been convicted of abusing children and who the police had been hunting for years. Jose Ramos was romantically involved with a woman who had once been hired to accompany Etten home from school. As time went on, investigation refocused interest. Officials had searched the basement of a Lower Manhattan building for 8 hours in the year 2000. That building was where Ramos had previously resided. Investigators discovered pieces of bones, but it turned out that they belonged to animals. In the year 2012, after authorities discovered that a man by the name of Othniel Miller had laid a concrete floor soon after Etten vanished, they launched a search and dug up his workshop. Othniel Miller was a handyman who reportedly knew Etten Patz. Etten often visited him at his workshop. In fact, the $1 note that Etten carried the morning he was last seen was given to him by Othniel Miller. However, the search, which sparked a fresh round of news media attention, failed to find Etten's remains. But after a few weeks passed, a guy from New Jersey named Josie Lopez got in touch with the authorities and said that he thought his brother-in-law, Pedro Hernandez, might have something to do with Etten Patz abduction. Back then, on May 25, 1979, Pedro Hernandez was an 18-year-old high school dropout who had recently relocated to Manhattan from Camden, New Jersey. He worked as a stock clerk in a bodega near Etten Patz bus stop on West Broadway and Prince Street. Shortly after Etten vanished, perhaps within days, Pedro Hernandez went back to New Jersey and took a job in a clothing factory there. Not long after, he suddenly began telling people that he had killed a child in New York City. At a spiritual retreat, he confided in an elder from his church group and confessed before a prayer group, breaking down in tears. He also confessed to his previous wife before they got married. However, their testimony indicated that the accounts varied. Pedro Hernandez's childhood friend thought he had killed a black child. His former wife, after hearing Muchacho, thought he had killed a teenage boy. Investigators questioned Pedro Hernandez after his brother-in-law dialed 911. The police claimed that after spending many hours with the detectives, Pedro gave in. He claimed that he had asked Etten Patz if he wanted a soda in order to entice him down the bodega's basement. The little boy, who initially intended to buy a soda with his $1 bill, innocently followed him and was immediately attacked. In a segment of the interview that was captured on camera, Pedro Hernandez said to the detectives, "I grabbed him by the neck and I started to choke him." He refrained from claiming that he had killed Etten, explaining that the little boy was still alive when he had placed him in a plastic bag and then placed the bag inside of a box, which he then discarded about a block away. Pedro Hernandez's words have served as the foundation of the prosecution's case against him. Prosecutors have had little to work with in the absence of Etten's remains or any crime scene from which they could gather evidence. In addition to presenting the testimony of the investigators and the people he had confessed to decades before, they also played video recordings of the interviews Pedro Hernandez made to the police shortly before his arrest. The main focus of Pedro Hernandez's defense has been to cast doubt on his credibility. His attorneys contend that 56-year-old Pedro Hernandez has low intelligence as well as a personality condition that impairs his ability to discriminate between truth and fiction. Therefore, they claim just because he admitted to what he thought he had done does not indicate he actually did it. Becky Hernandez, Pedro Hernandez's youngest child, testified about her father's strange conduct, including his claims of seeing angels and devils watering a dead tree limb to make it grow, and how she would catch him talking to himself. The defense, however, claimed that the initial suspect, Jose Ramos, the child molester who had been found guilty, had the chance and the incentive to have been accountable for Etten Pat's disappearance. Members of the jury were in doubts after hearing their arguments. There was a deadlocked jury after 18 days of deliberations. In 2015, the judge declared a mistrial. Only one member of the panel who didn't think Pedro Hernandez was guilty held out. However, following a 4-month trial on February 14, 2017, Pedro Hernandez was found guilty of murder and kidnapping. He was then sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Why do you think Pedro Hernandez committed such evil atrocity? Was he truly possessed by a demon? On August 30, 1991, Donna Lane Sanchez left the Four Seasons Motor Lodge in Los Altos, California with her boyfriend, Bernardo Bass. This would be the last time anyone saw Donna alive. She was reported missing by her family in October of 1991. A witness came forward. He told investigators that he drove with Donna and Bernardo to a junkyard in Sunnydale, California. There, Donna Bernardo got into an argument that ended with Bernardo fatally shooting Donna and fleeing the scene. The man refused to testify against Bernardo, so investigators had to try and find more evidence. Bernardo's sister claimed that she sold the car the couple drove. The weapon that was used to take Don's life could not be found anywhere. Investigators searched Bernardo's home with cadaver dogs. The dogs smelled human remains inside a closet. This was unfortunately not enough evidence for an arrest to be made. But then NASA stepped in. In 2009, police officials made their way back to the junkyard looking for anything useful. Digging up the entire field was cost prohibitive, so they needed to find another way to see what might be underground. Metal detectors wouldn't help, because the lot was already filled with so much debris. The Menlo Park District Attorney's Office then called NASA engineers. The engineers then deployed a Sensita Max 5 rover to perform magnetic surveys. The rover is an autonomous ground vehicle. It is designed for Earth science missions to map ground magnetic data and survey points of geological interest underground. The rover did a detailed sweep of what lay beneath the old junkyard, looking specifically for old car parts and possibly the remains of Don Sanchez. It didn't find the victim's body, but it was able to analyze data provided by the rover to give the district attorney's office some very promising points of interest that might be the evidence it sought. Once the points detailed by the rover were excavated, it did indeed reveal old buried car parts that belonged to a 1979 Pontiac Grand Prix that once belonged to Bernardo Bass. Once tested, they revealed that Bass took the victim's body into his car and possibly held her in a closet at his home near the junkyard for some time. Bass was arrested in connection to the case in 2010 and initially pled not guilty when he realized all the evidence against him. And if he was found guilty, he was facing 25 years to life in prison. He changed his plea to no contest. This resulted in a 6-year sentence for manslaughter. It's not really an ending that brought justice for Don Sanchez. The bodies of 3 women were found floating in Tampa Bay, Florida on June 4, 1989. The first body was found when several people on board a sailboat crossing under the Sunshine Skyway saw an object in the water. The second body was seen floating on the pier in St. Petersburg, 2 miles north of the first. While the Coast Guard were recovering the second body, a call about a third body was received. The body was seen floating 200 yards to the east of the second body. All 3 females were found floating face down, bound with a rope around the neck. Autopsies show that all 3 victims had water in their lungs. This proved that they had been thrown into the water while still alive. They were identified as 36-year-old Joan Rogers and her 2 daughters, 17-year-old Michelle and 14-year-old Christy. It was determined that all 3 of them were assaulted as well. Investigators decided to create a timeline of events leading up to their bodies being found. On May 26, 1989, Joan, Michelle, and Christy left their family farm in wheelchair, Ohio for a vacation in Florida. It was the first time they had left their home state. They stayed in Orlando, Florida for a few days. They were last seen alive at a hotel in Tampa on June 3, 1989, and the next day they would be found on June 4th. Marine researchers at the University of South Florida estimated from currents and patterns that the victims were thrown from a boat and not from a bridge or dry land. Joan's car, a 1984 Oldsmobile Calais with Ohio license plate, was found at the boat dock by the Courtney Campbell Causeway. Inside the car, investigators found notes written by a man on a brochure. The man wrote down directions and a description to his boat to Joan. So far, investigators knew roughly when the crime took place and that the person responsible owned a boat. Local police decided to post images of the note on billboards in the Tampa Bay area. They were hoping someone would recognize the man's handwriting. They tried their best to catch the man as they believed he was planning his next attack. Fortunately, their efforts paid off. Someone called police saying their former neighbor's handwriting looked exactly the same as the handwriting on the note. They had a copy of a work order their former neighbor had written. Through handwriting analysis, the two samples were matched conclusively. The man whose handwriting it was is Ova Chandler. A palm print found on the brochure was also matched to Chandler's. He had sold his boat and left town with his family soon after the billboards appeared. Chandler was found in Daytona Beach, and he was taken into custody. Chandler was born on October 11, 1946 in Cincinnati, Ohio. When he was 10 years old, his father took his own life. At the funeral, Chandler reportedly jumped into his father's open grave. When he was 14 years old, he began stealing cars and was arrested 20 times as a juvenile. As an adult, he was charged with a variety of crimes, including possession of counterfeit money, loitering, burglary, kidnapping, and armed robbery. Later on in life, Chandler found work as an unlicensed aluminum siding contractor. At his trial, Chandler said he met Joan, Michelle, and Christy Rogers and gave them directions, but he never saw them again. Chandler admitted that he had been in Tampa Bay that evening. The police had evidence that telephone calls were made from his boat around the same time. Chandler's daughter testified that her father had talked about ending the lives of 3 women and that he was afraid of returning to Tampa Bay. On November 4, 1994, Chandler was found guilty. It was decided that he has to pay for the crime with his life. Chandler awaited execution of his sentence at the Union Correctional Institution. On November 15, 2011, Chandler was executed at the Florida State Prison in Rafer. Investigators always believed Chandler was responsible for a lot more crimes. You do not just commit such a heinous crime and then be done. On February 25, 2014, investigators revealed that DNA evidence identified Chandler as the man responsible for taking the lives of Ivelisse Barrios Bigueres in Cold Springs, Florida on November 27, 1990. Ivelisse was a 20-year-old newlywed who was last seen at Sawgrass Mills Mall, where she worked at a sporting goods store. When she did not return home, her husband went to the mall and found her car, a 1985 Ford Tempo with the tires slashed. It is believed that Chandler, after watching the victim for 2 days, slashed the tires, arrived in the guise of a helpful stranger and offered to help. 3 hours after she was reported missing, her body was found under a residential mailbox in a local neighborhood by 2 men returning from a fishing trip. Investigators are still working to see if Chandler had involvement in any other cold cases. Janet Christensen grew up in a Mormon family in Virginia. In 1998, she met Raven Abaroa, who was also a Mormon. They met at Southern Virginia University, where she played soccer. He was a fellow soccer player who instantly swept her off her feet. In August of 2000, after 2 years together, Janet and Raven married at the Mormon Temple in Washington, D.C. They then settled in southeastern Virginia. Her friends and family thought that the life for the newlywed couple was perfect. Soon after their wedding, a job opportunity took the couple to Durham, North Carolina. Both of them took positions at a sporting goods company. Not long after that, Raven told Janet he wanted out of the marriage. He told her that he had been cheating on her with several different people. Before they separated, Janet learned that she was pregnant. Janet did not want to raise the baby as a single mother, so the couple tried to make things work. To friends and family of Janet, it seemed like it was working when they welcomed their son Caden on October 17, 2004. Raven told Janet that he would no longer cheat on her, that she was the only one for him and that he would make it work. Just when it seemed things were getting better, their marriage suffered yet another blow. Raven was caught stealing from the sports apparel company where they both worked in December of 2004. He eventually pleaded guilty to 5 charges of embezzlement, but avoided serving any jail time. Janet was mortified and resigned from her job. This now meant that, on top of all the other problems, they also now had financial problems. On the evening of April 26, 2005, Raven called 911. He told them that Janet was not alive anymore and she had been shot. According to him, he left the house at 8 p.m. to go play soccer with his friends. He said that Janet was getting ready for bed then. He goes on to claim he returned home after 10 p.m. and then found Janet's body in their bedroom. Although Raven said that Janet had been shot, Durham police, who arrived on the scene, quickly realized she had been stabbed. Investigators took crime scene photos and all the evidence they thought might be useful later. As they were working on the case, Raven moved to Salt Lake City, Utah with their son, Caden. There, he met Vanessa Pond. She was a single mother whose daughter was in the same daycare program as Caden. They soon started dating. Raven mentioned to her that his wife passed away, but did not elaborate. After moving in with him, Vanessa decided to go online to find out more about what happened to Janet. After seeing that someone took Janet's life, she questioned Raven. He had an answer for every question she had, and she believed he was innocent. In the summer of 2008, 3 years after Janet's life was taken, Vanessa and Raven got married in the backyard of her parents when Janet's sisters learned of this. They decided to reach out to Vanessa to warn her that they believed Raven was responsible for what happened to Janet. After Vanessa was informed by Janet's sisters of their suspicion, she again questioned Raven. This time he began acting in ways she did not understand. According to Vanessa, he could say the most horrible things, and then moments later he would apologize. The outburst then became physical. One day he grabbed Vanessa and threw her up against the wall and she fell. Raven tried to convince her that she merely tripped. Just 4 months into their marriage, Vanessa feared for her safety. The couple separated and the marriage was annulled. She went public in 2009, saying that she also believed Raven took Janet's life back in 2005. Also, in 2009, Durham Police Detective Charles Soule was assigned to Janet's case. He looked at Raven's initial statements and found that they were contradictory. Then, as he was reviewing the crime scene photos, something stuck out to him as odd. He noticed the contact case on the counter with the top off. This indicated that the contacts were probably not in there. This would be contrary to her going to bed, or as Raven said, in the bed going to sleep. When police interviewed Janet's family and friends, they said that Janet was consistent with removing her contacts before going to sleep. Charles Soule found this detail to be suspicious. Charles also found it strange that there was no disturbance in their bedroom. A stabbing is usually violent with a struggle. Raven was arrested on February 1, 2010, and was charged with taking Janet's life. Then, in July of 2010, Janet Abaroa's body was exhumed so that the authorities could determine if she had been wearing contacts when she was buried. Dr. Charles Zwirling examined the remains. He was able to remove fragments of contact lenses from Janet's eyes. Dr. Zwirling then conducted lots of tests using sets of pig eyes and contacts to prove that the contacts he found on Janet's eyes were ones she wore before her life was taken, and were not ones that would have been placed on her eyes for some reason at the funeral home. Raven Abaroa's trial began in 2013. Prosecutors presented him as a controlling husband. Vanessa also testified against him and talked about his aggression on the soccer field and how his aggression turned on her. In May of 2013, the jury failed to reach a verdict. 11 people said he was guilty, but 1 person believed Raven to be innocent. The judge declared a mistrial. Then, before Raven's second trial could start in March of 2014, Raven decided to enter a plea deal for voluntary manslaughter. A judge sentenced him to a pitiful 95 months to 123 months in jail. He was granted credit for the 4 years he had spent behind bars before and during the trial, which was applied as time served. Raven did not testify at his trial, but he spoke in court after being sentenced. "I would just like to state that I didn't receive a fair trial the first time. I don't think I'd receive a fair trial a second time. I don't think it's worth risking the possibility of spending the rest of my life in prison for something I didn't do. I take this plea deal to ensure that doesn't happen, and that's the only reason." Raven was released from prison on Christmas Day in 2017. Serving less than 3 years, he now lives in Utah. Janet's brother Mark Christensen had this to say about his sister. "The world should remember Janet as an amazing person. Somebody who was kind. Someone who was loving. Someone who would just show you how to be a better person. Someone who can make you laugh. Someone that can make you happy." On Friday, August 13th, 1982, around 2 p.m., 17 years old, Yunula Luciani was playing the summer hit single, "Forget Me Nots" by Patrice Rookins on the stereo, filling her family's London home in Hampstead with the smooth, cheerful rhythms of the American soul singer. Lucy was enjoying having the home to herself. Earlier that day, she and her mother had visited her father at the shoe repair shop he owned in a strip of stores in Fairhazel Gardens. They had taken his lunch to him. Around 1:30 p.m., her mother, Ellie, had given her the go-ahead to return home and start preparing the family's dinner, while she promised to join her soon enough. Lucy walked the short distance home, arriving a little while later, and got to work. As her favorite song played, she took a lamb leg out of the fridge and started making dinner for the family. She paused her task when she heard a knock at the door. She set the lamb leg on the kitchen counter and peeked out of the window. Whatever the person outside said persuaded her to go open the door. At the doorstep stood a man in his early 20s. Being short and skinny, his hair was blow-dried and buff in such a way that he resembled his favorite actor, John Travolta, from the movie Saturday Night Fever. Lucy was a bit surprised to see a strange man standing in front of her home and wondered what he needed. A neighbor passed by and spotted Lucy and the man at her doorstep. They seemed to be having a conversation, and Lucy was said to have been at ease with the stranger, laughing even. However, 20 minutes after the neighbor spotted them, he heard a scream but did not pay much attention to it. At about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Lucy's parents George and Ellie arrived home, expecting to find their daughter busy making dinner as she had been instructed, but they were surprised at how silent everywhere was. They checked the kitchen and there was no sign of her. 2 pieces of Lucy's jewelry, a broken ankle chain and an earring, were scattered about the stairs and the floor. The leg of lamb Lucy had brought out of the fridge was still sitting on the kitchen counter when they called out for her and she didn't answer. They knew something was wrong. They started to panic because it was unlike Lucy to leave the home without prior notice. They rushed into her bedroom in search of her, but she wasn't there either. However, as they entered their own bedroom, they were greeted by a sight beyond their worst imagination. On their bed, laid a partially naked Lucy's dead body. Her t-shirt and bra had been cut right through the middle, exposing her bare chest. She was also naked from the waist down. Her hair and clothing were drenched with water. Words could not describe how horrified and devastated Lucy's parents were. They called in the police, who made a thorough round at the crime scene. Investigators discovered that the bath in the bathroom at the top of the home had several inches of water in it, and the door to another bedroom, the only one with a lock, had been forced open. Lucy's autopsy results revealed that she had suffocated, probably as a result of having her head restrained in an arm lock. She had, moreover, been bitten, punched, and ultimately raped. According to the police, the murderer forcefully barged into the home and chased Lucy up the stairs. The broken chain, which was discovered on the carpet, suggested that the killer may have grabbed Lucy's ankle as she ran. It is believed that Lucy tried to hide in her brother's bedroom, as it was the only room with a lock on the door. Investigators discovered a footprint at the bottom of the door. Killer had forced his way into the room, breaking off the locks. More of Lucy's jewelry was discovered upstairs, including a damaged ring and a bangle, indicating that she fought and raced from room to room in order to escape her attacker. Since her clothes and hair were completely drenched, the police suspect that the attacker finally cornered Lucy in the bathroom as she tried to hide in the bathtub. Lucy's murder horrified the neighborhood and spurred a massive manhunt, but it took decades for the case to be solved. Evidence such as semen was found on Lucy's body, but as DNA testing was not available in 1982, the sample was useless at the time. Unknown finger and palm prints were also removed off the bath's rim. The murder of Yanela Luciani generated a lot of media attention. A week after her murder, Lucy's sister Maria bravely recreated Lucy's final movement as she walked home from the shoe repair shop for the television program Police 5. In Belsize Road, a mobile police station was set up where more than 1,000 people gave witness accounts and fingerprint samples. No one was able to identify the individual who had knocked on the Yanni's door despite the intensive police investigation and community help. Investigations showed that Lucy, Maria, and their mother, Ellie, were followed twice by a guy close to their home 3 months prior to the murder. He was described as being between the ages of 22 and 25, standing at 5 feet 6 inches with a Mediterranean complexion and having black hair that was combed back. On the 1-year and 2-year anniversary of Lucy's murder, further appeals were submitted. In 1984, on BBC Crime Watch, a composite sketch of the man Maria and her mother had seen was displayed. The case was once again featured on BBC Crime Watch in 2000, however. This time, there was no resolution. In 2003, 5,000 appeal flyers were distributed to nearby homes and a £10,000 reward was offered for anyone who had a vital lead that could pinpoint the culprit. Metropolitan officers and scientists have routinely examined Lucy's murder case over the years to see if advancements in forensic science would offer some clues. An incomplete DNA profile for a semen stain on the bedspread where Lucy had been discovered was taken by a scientist in 1999. Additional testing revealed that it matched the fragment of DNA retrieved from Lucy's body. In 2003, a near-complete DNA profile of the semen stain on the bedspread was acquired using a more advanced profiling approach. The DNA profile was checked against the National DNA Database, but there were no matches. Even though the case was reopened, it could not progress any further. 12 years later, in December 2015, a man named James Warnock from Camden, Northwest London, was arrested by the police for having pornographic photographs of children. Police had no idea they had caught a killer. As a routine, Warnock offered a DNA sample that was entered into the national database. Surprisingly, his DNA was a nearly perfect match with the semen discovered on the bedspread where Lucy was discovered. The likelihood that the sample may have come from someone else was assessed to be 1 in a billion. A break in the case came when police had started to believe that Lucy's murderer was either dead or had relocated overseas. Investigators had looked into Australia and Cyprus, not knowing that the perpetrator remained in the neighborhood the entire time. On January 12, 2016, officers tracked James Warnock down and discovered him waiting for them while quietly drinking beer in his underwear. Aside from the police matching his DNA and fingerprints, they were able to confirm that the sketch created from eyewitness accounts of the culprit was startlingly close to photographs of James Warnock that had been taken at the time. James Warnock was taken into custody first for a murder investigation and then for rape. Warnock, who was 22 at the time he killed Lucy, lived with his wife, a little more than half a mile from the Yiannis family home, and had been working as a tiler in a nearby street. When questioned by police about the murder, Warnock claimed he liked to chat and have a laugh and had a similar appearance to John Travolta at the time of the crime. He denied raping and killing Lucy. He said to the police in many interviews that he had been seeing Lucy in secret after she drew his attention when he allegedly brought some boots into her father's shoe repair shop. He claimed Lucy had a lovely smile. He went on to tell investigators that he and Lucy happened to run into each other by coincidence in another store and struck up a conversation. According to him, they subsequently met 6 or 7 times, and their relationship quickly became intimate, and that explains why his DNA was found on the bedspread. Officers were able to quickly refute Warnock's assertions because a medical examiner and Lucy's family had revealed that she had been a virgin before being raped and killed. During the trial, despite evidence to the contrary, James Warnock insisted that he used to visit their home to have sex with Lucy, forcing Lucy's brothers, Rick and Petros, as well as her sister, Maria, to sit through his arguments. They wept and hung their heads as he told jurors of fictitious sexual encounters, saying, "It was always nice. It was not, vigorous or anything. We didn't go mad. It was very quick. It was gentle." The prosecution maintained that in the months leading up to the murder, James Warnock was allegedly stalking Lucy on the street because he had seen her and was attracted to her. However, they had never been close, and when he saw her coming home alone that day, he simply knocked on her door and saw a chance to carry out his evil deed. James Warnock, who compared himself to his favorite actor, John Travolta, saw himself as an irresistible young man who thought every woman would fall at his feet when he asked. When Lucy rejected his attempts to charm his way inside, he was probably hurt by her rejection, and so he broke down the door to get inside and pursued her up the stairs, where he eventually accomplished his horrible task. The trial lasted for just 2 hours, and a jury at the Old Bailey found James Warnock guilty of murder, and Recorder of London, Nicholas Hilliard QC, sentenced him to life in prison with a minimum of 25 years. James Warnock was also given concurrent sentences of 20 years for rape and a 4 to 5 year sentence after pleading guilty to 6 counts of disseminating pornographic pictures in 2013. Lucy's brother, Rick, claimed that the incident had left the family forever damaged. The magnitude and horror of what happened that day is indescribable. We never gave up hoping and are truly grateful to the police for finally bringing him to justice, Rick said. 80-year-old Antonio Rodriguez and his 77-year-old wife Luz lived in Cleveland, Texas in 2005. Antonio was a World War II veteran. The couple had been a beloved fixture in Cleveland and were known for their kindness. They operated a small Mexican food restaurant from their home to serve shift workers at a local plywood mill. On April 14, 2005, the couple's daughter Carolina Tejeda went to their home to make lunch for them. They didn't answer the door, so she thought they might be asleep, but still entered to make them lunch. Carolina then found her father's body on the floor of their bedroom and her mother's body in their bed. They had both been beaten and strangled. Police dogs were able to track the scent of a suspect across some railroad tracks to a nearby apartment complex, but were unable to lead investigators any further than that. Blood from an unknown suspect was found on a large rug in the couple's home, and the DNA was entered into the FBI's combined DNA index system. But there were no hits at the time. For years, the case went cold. Then, in March of 2021, when investigators again entered the DNA sample into Cody's, they found a match. The DNA was linked to Shelley Susan Thompson Lemoyne. She was serving time in a Texas prison for an unrelated drug offense. Lemoyne denied knowing the Rodriguez family and having any involvement in the crime. Another DNA sample was taken from her at the prison, and it was matched to the DNA found at the crime scene back in 2005. She was arrested on the 8th of July of 2022 outside her parole office in connection to the Rodriguez case. Cleveland Police Chief Daryl Brassad had this to say after the arrest was made. Sometimes such small pieces of evidence can solve a case. And in this case, it was that piece of carpet that was found inside the home that had a speck of blood on it. For the couple's family, it was a welcome development in the case that has continued to haunt the family. Their daughter, Carolina Tejeda, who made the horrific discovery, said, "I knew it would come. I didn't know this long, but I knew this day would come. The community has always kept our parents in their prayers, and we're just very thankful, and God is good." She also said that she believes more people could have been involved in the slaying, and that she did not know and had never seen Thompson Lemoyne. Martin Rodriguez, another one of the couple's 10 children, said that he believes the arrest is the first step in helping the family heal from the tragedy. "I have seen the hand of God at work today. Our family is extremely relieved that there is activity in our parents' case. We are grateful for the efforts of the Texas Rangers, particularly Ranger Bess, Cleveland Police Department, and the Liberty County District Attorney's Office. They have shown that they do care about what happened to our parents. They have restored our hope and faith in the justice system." 12-year-old Laisha Michelle Jackson lived in Montgomery County, Texas in 1979. She left her home on September 7th to spend the day at a community pool in her neighborhood. When she did not return home, her family got worried and called 911. The following day, her glasses were found at a local intersection, but no other sign of her. 6 days later, on September 13th, 1979, an oil-filled worker found her body in a heavily wooded area near a pipeline in Montgomery County. An autopsy report revealed that she had been assaulted before her life was taken. Investigators collected DNA that belonged to the suspect from her body and stored it to be used later. Detectives began an extensive investigation into her case that lasted for years, and while all leads were explored, the case eventually became cold. In 2021, investigators decided to take another look. They made use of a new technology called MVAC. The NVAC system enables investigators to solve more crime through better DNA collection. It expands potential evidentiary items by collecting DNA from porous and rough objects or surfaces. Montgomery County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Squad utilized this new technology in October of 2021 to successfully extract unknown DNA from Leish's clothing collected at the crime scene. From there, the unknown DNA was sent to Texas DPS forensic scientists, who were able to develop a DNA profile of the person that took her life. In 2022, investigators submitted the profile into the FBI's combined DNA index system. Cody's determined that it matched with a man named Gerald Dwight Casey. Casey had been executed in 2002 for taking someone else's life in Montgomery County in 1989. Casey, who was 34 years old back then, and his accomplice, 36-year-old Carla Smith, tried to steal guns from a man named Daryl Pennington in 1989. When they arrived at Pennington's home, they instead found his roommate, Sonia Lynn Howell. Casey beat her with a home telephone and went on to shoot her 9 times. He then dumped her body in a wooded area. He was convicted in 1991. Before ending Howell's life, Casey had been in and out of prison for multiple convictions, including burglary and multiple drug charges. The Montgomery County Sheriff's Office has noted that this marks the oldest cold case solved by their department to date. 54-year-old Nora Sheehan lived in Cork, Ireland. She was a mother of 3. Nora was last seen when she attended a medical appointment for a dog bite at the South Infirmary Hospital on June 6, 1981. When Nora did not return home after her appointment, her family reported her missing. The National Police Service of the Republic of Ireland, or the Gardaí, as they are more commonly referred to, started searching for Nora. 6 days later, Nora's body was found by forestry workers at the viewing point in the Chippewa Woods. It's about 18 miles from where she was last seen. It was not revealed how her life was taken, but the investigators simply noted that it was violent. Despite the Gardaí investigating the case, they could not identify the person that took her life. In 2016, the Gardaí Serious Crime Review Team reopened the cold case and spent several years examining all details associated with it. In June of 2022, detectives arrested 73-year-old Noel Long at his home in Maubancork in connection to Nora's case. He was then taken to Bond and Garda Station. A short hearing was held where it seems that Long will take a guilty plea. His attorney Eddie Burke said that his client was a 73-year-old man in receipt of a state pension. Burke also requested that Long will receive all necessary medical treatment while on remand because he has severe medical issues. Detectives have not made it public what exactly led them to Noel Long, because it is still an ongoing investigation. On July 16, 1980, Jeremy Stoner was born in California. He had 3 siblings. Justin was the younger brother and Jason and Joshua were the older brothers. Their home was in Vallejo, California, a charming and picturesque community in its own right. Jeremy was a contented and lively youngster. He was devoted to both his friends and family. Attending school and picking up new skills was something he cherished. He also enjoyed watching cartoons, playing with his toys, and riding his bike. He had a huge heart and a bright smile. It was February 21st, 1987, on a Saturday morning when 6-year-old Jeremy and his 2 older brothers, aged 11 and 9 years, were playing outside close to their home. A relative was keeping an eye on Jeremy and his brothers while their parents were at work. Their relative had to abruptly depart to take her sick daughter to the hospital. The boys were instructed to wait at home for their parents to return. Rather, they made their way to a neighbor's residence. While they were there, a neighbor scolded Jeremy for spilling ketchup, and they left right after. At 5 p.m., the boy's mother came home to find the house unoccupied, leading her to believe that the boys were playing at the neighbor's, as they frequently did. However, when the 2 older boys returned 2 hours later without Jeremy, the family initiated a search. They contacted the police since Jeremy was nowhere to be found. It didn't take long for Vallejo police to conclude that Jeremy had been abducted. He was last seen, according to reports, at a Dairy Queen on Springs Road, which is roughly 5 minutes walk from the family's house. Around 7:30 that evening, a worker there reported to the investigators that he had seen Jeremy with an adult guy. 4 days later, on February 25, 1987, Jeremy's body was discovered on Sherman Island in Sacramento County. For people heading along Sherman Island, road in the Delta became bogged in the mud. In search of something to put between the tires, the driver got out. What she rather found was a small boy's body. He had been beaten, stabbed, and choked. They contacted the authorities and informed them of their discovery. Investigators quickly made their way to the crime scene and gathered all the evidence they could and stored it for later use. In Vallejo, word of Jeremy's passing traveled fast. The people were horrified by what had happened to him and were devastated. They wanted to do everything in their power to help his family since they felt bad for them. They hugged them and handed them flowers and cards. When Jeremy vanished, they looked for him. They held a candlelight vigil. They offered prayers for him and his family as well. Terry Curtola was Vallejo's mayor at the time. He claimed that for 4 days, the residents of Vallejo joined the Stoner family. He restated that they had looked, prayed, and wept for him. It wasn't long until a suspect walked right inside the Vallejo Police Department. Approximately a week after Jeremy's death, Sean Quincy Melton, an unemployed security guard, informed authorities he could have information regarding the case. Melton acknowledged that he tried to dazzle police with his rudimentary research. To use his own words, he aspired to be a big shot. However, Melton's gradual change from a swaggering detective to a confused crime suspect was captured on camera. Throughout his interrogation, he had a terrible past and a disturbing mentality, as indicated by his authorship of The Wolf's Den, a book about child exploitation. Despite his insistence that it's a work of fiction, others questioned whether it was completely unrelated to his personal experiences. Sean Melton willingly went to the police station to give details about the case. He mentioned that he had heard tales and seen certain things that could help identify the offender. The police, however, suspected that he was involved in the crime. There was good cause for them to be skeptical about Sean Melton. Prior to his appointment, Sean Melton's psychologist reported to the police that he had admitted to having unsettling ideas about young boys. The doctor voiced worries that Sean Melton might be dangerous and might be connected to the case of Jeremy Stoner. Sean Melton was the target of a lengthy 30-hour interview by the police, during which they tested him with a polygraph and asked a lot of questions. They also drew a sketch of him and contrasted it with the kidnapper's description provided by a witness. Their aim was to gather intelligence and possibly determine his connection to the case. Sean Melton adamantly maintained his innocence, stating that he was unaware of the situation and denied any role in the crime. The polygraph test was successfully completed by him, and the sketch of him did not match the witness's account. He insisted that his only goal was to help the police crack the case. Still, the police continued to pursue Sean Melton and proposed a fresh theory. They claimed Sean Melton had numerous personality disorders and speculate that the crime may have been committed by one of his alter egos, John Wolfe. They asserted that Sean Melton did not recall committing these acts. In retaliation, the police detained Sean Melton and accused him of kidnapping and killing Jeremy. However, there was insufficient evidence to convict him. There were 2 trials, but the jury were unable to come to a unanimous decision in both cases. The judge was forced to dismiss the case as a result. Sean Melton died in 2000, but he never acknowledged having anything to do with the terrible end of Jeremy Stoner. Because there had been no development and no new leads or evidence, the Jeremy Stoner case was labeled a cold case and went unresolved for several years. However, there was a noteworthy advancement in Jeremy Stoner's situation in 2023. Thanks to cutting-edge technology, the authorities were able to obtain a fresh lead through DNA testing. Jeremy's remain samples were compared to those in a criminal database by the police via DNA testing. This development promised to throw fresh light on the enduring enigma surrounding Jeremy's terrible end. When the police discovered a match, they eventually located the offender. The name of the perpetrator is Fred Kane III. 69 years old Kane was taken into custody from his Central Point, Oregon residence. District Attorney Krishna Abrams expressed gratitude for having cold case investigators who are so committed to solving these horrifying murders, regardless of the passage of time. According to 1984 media accounts, Kane, who was 30 at the time, was allegedly accused of attacking a 17-year-old in San Bernardino County. On suspicion of attacking the teenager at knife point, Kane and his roommate were taken into custody. Kane was charged with forceful assault and weapon usage, with enhancements for 4 previous jail terms, but a jury ruled him not guilty later that year. Because the investigation is still underway, the District Attorney's Office for Solano County has stated that it will not be providing any more information. But Martinez police have probably noticed Kane's arrest. From the start, Jeremy's case and Eric's decoys were frequently brought up in the same sentence. Just 1 month before Jeremy's disappearance, on January 19, 1987, 9-year-old Eric rode his bike from his Martinez home to a relative's house. Eric rode the trip frequently and knew it well. He left his house at about 11 in the morning, knowing that once he got to his relative's house, a few blocks away, he would call just like he always did. After he failed to return home, a search was conducted. His remains were discovered not far from Martinez Junior High School. After receiving about a dozen stab wounds, he passed away from his wounds. 25-year-old Lori Houts lived in Mountain View, California in 1992. She worked as a computer engineer. On September 5th of same year, Lori's body was found in her car in Mountain View, near a garbage dump about a mile away from her workplace. Rope was used to strangle her and was still around her neck. Police found footprints on the inside of her windshield. Investigators quickly identified a prime suspect, John Kevin Woodward. He was allegedly openly jealous of Lori. Woodward had developed a romantic attachment to Lori's boyfriend, who was also his roommate. In the late 1990s, Woodward was tried twice in the case, but it was unsuccessful. The case was dismissed by a judge for insufficient evidence after a jury could not reach a verdict after the second trial. Woodward's fingerprints were found located on the outside of Lori's car, but investigators could not prove he was inside of the car. Woodward moved to the Netherlands after the trial. Later on, he would become the president and CEO of the Bay Area company, ReadyTech. It is an online training company. Investigators did not give up on Lori's case and still followed up on leads and searched for evidence. In late 2020, investigators resubmitted all the forensic evidence they had for further analysis. Over 80 latent fingerprints that were collected at the crime scene were re-examined by the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office Identification Unit. This resulted in even more fingerprints matching Woodward. His fingerprints were found in places only the person who took her life could have touched. John Woodward was apprehended by police at JFK Airport in New York on July 9, 2022 after arriving from Amsterdam. If convicted, Woodward faces life in prison. Deputy District Attorney Rob Baker of the Santa Clara County's DA office had this to say: "I'm thrilled that we have a second chance to seek justice for Lori after nearly 30 years. It's so rare that new evidence is discovered decades after it is dismissed, giving us another shot at holding Mr. Woodward accountable." The arrest of Mr. Woodward is a testament to the advances in forensic science. Without those advances, we never would have been able to refile this case. The fact that police didn't start regularly collecting DNA evidence until maybe 20 to 25 years ago makes cold case investigations very challenging. For example, Lori's purse and wallet might have had a lot of DNA on them, but testing was impossible because they were contaminated with fingerprint dust. Lori's family issued a statement: "Lori and Houch was a beloved family member and friend to many. Although she was only 5 foot tall, she had a huge heart and her humor and spunk were endearing to all. The way Lori lived and treated people was a stunning example of what was right in the world. She was a gem to so many, but her bright life was taken from us at the age of 25. We are hopeful that justice can finally be served for Lori, and incredibly appreciative of law enforcement agencies who have never given up on her. To keep her memory alive, Lori's family established the Lori House Memorial Girls Athletic Scholarship, whose donations go to graduating female seniors. 37-year-old Lena Reyes Geddes lived in Youngstown, Ohio with her husband Edward Geddes. On April 8, 1998, Lena left her home on a trip from Ohio to Dallas and then to Mexico to visit her family. That would be the last time anyone would see Lena alive. 6 months later, with no sign of Lena since she left their home, Edward reported his wife missing. Investigators found it a bit strange that it took 6 months for Edward to report her missing. He was named a suspect, but investigators couldn't find enough concrete evidence against him. Edward was interviewed by police in October 1998. During the interview, he claimed his wife had planned to fly from Pittsburgh and dropped her off at the airport. On April 20, 1998, an unidentified deceased female was located along State Route 276 near Maiden Water Spring in Utah's Garfield County. When investigators arrived, they found a woman in her late 30s to mid-40s, covered with plastic bags, wrapped in duct tape, tied with rope, and placed inside a sleeping bag before being wrapped in a carpet. The woman had been shot. Her hands were cut off, which made identifying her really difficult. Sketches of the woman were shared around, hoping someone would recognize her. Despite an exhaustive investigation by the Garfield County Sheriff's Office and the Utah State Bureau of Investigation, the woman was not identified, and the case went cold. Since the woman could not be identified, she became known as the Maidenwater Jane Doe. In 2018, Ohio updated Lena's missing persons file and obtained a picture of her from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Immigration, and Customs Enforcement. A private citizen in California who enjoys researching true crime cases then linked the Maidenwater Jane Doe case to Lena. The internet sleuth noticed the mole in the right ear and told Utah authorities to call Youngstown's police about the missing case involving Lena. Lena's sister traveled from Mexico to offer DNA swabs. Not long after, investigators were able to confirm that the Maidenwater Jane Doe is indeed Lena Reyes Geddes. The question now was who took Lena's life. They interviewed a lot of people that knew her. They wanted to talk to her husband Edward Geddes, but he had taken his own life back in 2001. Another man police looked into was Scott Kimball. He took the lives of at least 4 people and is suspected in many other cases. Kimball was ultimately ruled out as a suspect. Investigators decided to try and find DNA on the plastic bags, rope, sleeping bag, and other items found at the crime scene. They were able to find DNA belonging to a male on the rope. They wanted to compare Edward's DNA to see if it belonged to him, but he had been cremated, so they couldn't exhume him. After family members of his were tracked down, their DNA samples were obtained. Finally, in 2022, it was confirmed that Edward Geddes' DNA matched the DNA of the unknown man found on the road. Investigators announced at a press conference in June of 2022 that they have enough evidence to say he was the one who took her life and to close the case. While it is frustrating that Edward is not alive anymore to face the charges against him, we at least know he was miserable, because he took his own life. Investigators have found no sign that Lena traveled anywhere and believe her trip was a ruse by Edward. They don't know why Edward drove across the country to dispose of his wife's remains, or why he decided to take her life. Utah State Bureau of Investigation agent Brian Davis said at the press conference, "There's a lot of ups and downs in law enforcement, but I would put this case at the top of just making you feel good. At least there's some closures. At least there's answers." Davis also mentioned it's not just the DNA that they have as evidence against Edward, but also other circumstantial evidence. Lena's sister Lucero, who had given her DNA to help identify Lena, said, "I felt like for 20 years no one would listen to me, but now I know what happened. I'm here to bring her home, not like I expected, but I'm bringing her back home with me." Subir Chatterjee lived in Houston, Texas in 2002. He was originally from Sri Lanka. Subir owned and operated the Coastal Gas Station convenience store. On February 15, 2002, around 12:50 p.m., officers with the Oak Ridge North Police Department were dispatched to Subir's store because witnesses heard gunshots. Officers who arrived at the scene found Subir's body in the office area of the gas station. He had been shot in the head. It was also discovered that someone had taken $160,000 in cash from the store. Investigators collected forensic evidence at the crime scene, including DNA that belonged to the person who took Subir's life. The DNA was found under Subir's fingernails. There was also blood from the suspect found. It was stored so it could be used later. At the time, law enforcement had few leads. The witnesses' descriptions were vague, and with no surveillance footage, there were no suspects. The case went cold for almost 20 years. Detective Kent Hubbard, who was the first one to arrive on the scene, persisted in investigating the case. He worked various leads all the time before coming across an article outlining how law enforcement in California used genealogy and DNA to solve cold cases. Hubbard then reached out to Parabon Nanolabs, an organization that uses genetic genealogy, phenotyping, ancestry, and kinship analysis to assist law enforcement in developing potential suspects for cases where DNA evidence is present. With the agreement of the Oak Ridge Police Department and the assistance with the Montgomery County District Attorney's Office, Hubbard requested and received funds to pay for the testing. In 2018, Parabon told Hubbard they identified 3 possible men whose DNA might be a match for the DNA sample found at the crime scene back in 2002. In 2019, investigators followed one of the men to a restaurant. There, they collected his DNA sample from a fork, coffee cup, and a piece of toast. After more DNA testing, on December 4, 2019, it was announced that the DNA from the crime scene matched Martin Isaac Tellez's DNA. On December 10, 2019, Tellez was arrested for the crime. Following the arrest, Tellez confessed to taking Subir's life while robbing him. He explained that his blood was present at the scene because Subir struck him in the head with a telephone to defend himself. While the case was pending, Tellez was out on a $500,000 bail. He cut off his GPS monitoring device and fled to Mexico. Fortunately, agents from Homeland Security and the U.S. Marshals successfully tracked him down and brought him back to the U.S. His trial started in 2022. On June 28, he pleaded guilty. Tellez was sentenced to 60 years in prison. Assistant District Attorney Donna Hansen said, "Martin Tellez lived more than 20 years of his life with his family and his loved ones around him. Meanwhile, members of the Chatterjee family were left with an empty chair and aching hearts, believing they might never know who was responsible." Detective Kent Hubbard never gave up on this case, and it was my privilege to be able to assist him in bringing justice and closure to Subir's family. Every life taken creates a wound in our community and in the lives of the victim's family. Some of those wounds, like the loss of this beloved father and husband, are very deep. In this case, those wounds were laid bare for decades. District Attorney Brett Lejon said, "Fortunately, a relentless instrument of dog justice in the form of Detective Hubbard made what was wrong right, and we hope that this measure of accountability will bring some relief to his grieving family." Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.